写真は今どこに向かっているのか、プレゼンティッドバイソニーワールドフォトグラフィーアワード。本日司会を務めさせていただきます、早見弘です。よろしくお願いいたします。本日はですね、現代写真美術館コロンビア大学シカゴキュレーターエグゼクティブディレクターのナターシャ・イーガンさんをゲストにお招きして開催していきます。でこの企画なんですけれども、ソニーワールドフォトグラフィーアワードのプレゼント企画ということで、まず最初にソニーワールドフォトグラフィーアワードがどういったコンペであるかということをちょっとご紹介させていただきたいと思います。もうすでにご承知の方もいらっしゃるかもしれませんけれども、ソニーワールドフォトグラフィーアワードはですね、写真文化の継続的な発展への貢献を目的に、2007年よりソニーが支援する写真コンテストになります。プロフェッショナル、一般公募、ユース、学生の4部門で構成され、あらゆるキャリアステージや作品ジャンルに対応したプラットフォームを提供しています。他にもですね、写真文化に多大な功績を残した個人や団体を表彰する特別功労賞、Outstanding Contribution to Photography Award であったりとか、一般公募部門に応募された作品の中から国ごとに優秀作品を表彰するナショナルアワード、そして受賞者の創作活動を資金面でサポートするソニーグラントなどですね、さまざまな支援を行っておりまして、それ以外にもですね、入賞者には賞金や賞品をはじめ、年間図録への掲載であったり、世界規模でのメディア露出の機会が与えられ、世界へと羽ばたく手助けをしてくれるというものがソニーワールドフォトグラフィーアワードになります。世界最大規模のフォトコンテストというふうに知られてますので、名前聞かれたこともあるかもしれません。で、その、ソニーワールドフォトグラフィーアワードなんですけれども、非常に何が素晴らしいか、あるいはコンペを選ぶときにどういう点が重要なのかということをですね、考えたときに、まず一つ、その審査員にどういった方々が参加されているかというのがあると思うんですけれども、まさにソニーワールドフォトグラフィーアワードの審査員に、毎年それぞれいろんな方が参加されるんですけれども、国際的にさまざまなエリアで活躍されている方がですね、審査員として参加されてまして、そういった方々に作品を見てもらえるということも非常にですね、このアワードの大きな魅力の一つになっていると思います。で、本日ゲストにお呼びしておりますのも、ソニーワールドフォトグラフィーアワード2021の審査員の一人でしたナターシャ・イーガンさんになります。コロンビアカレッジシカゴ現代写真美術館 MOCP のエグゼクティブディレクターということで、まずちょっと簡単にプロフィールをご紹介させていただきます。2000年よりコロンビアカレッジシカゴ現代写真美術館 MOCP のアソシエイトディレクター兼キュレーターを務められて、2011年にエグゼクティブディレクターに就任されました。これまでに50以上の展覧会を開催されていまして、アジアの現代美術や環境、戦争、経済などの社会問題に取り組むアーティストに焦点を当てた展覧会をキュレーションされています。過去の実績に2010年ヒューストンフォトフェストビエンナーレのゲストキュレーター、2016年にはフォトドバイエキシビションの米国パビリオンキュレーター、2019年に中国の練習におけるリアンゾーのフォトグラフィービエンナーレのゲストキュレーターを務めています。またこれまでにですね、数多くの出版物にエッセイなども寄稿されてまして、国際的な講演も10年以上にわたり行われています。コロンビアカレッジシカゴの写真学科と人文学科で教鞭を取られていまして、ご自身としては、ワシントン州タコマ市のピュージェット山大学でアジア研究の学士号、コロンビアカレッジシカゴで美術館研究の修士号と写真芸術の美術学修士を取得されていらっしゃいます。でそんなですね、ソニーワールドフォトグラフィーアワードの審査員でもあられたナターシャさんを今日はお招きして、写真は今どこに向かっているのかというタイトルでお話を聞いていきたいなと思っております。このあたりをですね、非常に興味深い、僕自身もいろいろ聞きたいなと思っているもの、ナターシャさんにスライドもご用意いただきましたので、ぜひお話をいただきたいと思います。ナターシャさん、よろしくお願いいたします。
Hello, it's really wonderful to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today for the Sony Awards. I am Natasha Egan, and I'm the Executive Director of the Museum of Contemporary Photography at Columbia College, Chicago. And I'm just going to show you a little bit about what this museum is that I oversee and serve as a curator as well as the Executive Director. So the museum was founded in 1976. So we have been collecting photography since the late 70s. And currently we have 16,000 photographs in our permanent collection. what you're looking at on my screen now is one of the galleries. It's the main gallery that you walk into. And this was an exhibition where we were celebrating our collection when we turned 40. So MOCP at 40, which was in 2006. And this was just a way to celebrate many works in the collection, just a fraction of the collection. This was another exhibition that was based in the collection, and I wanted to just point out a little bit about this exhibition. One of the things that this exhibition did is we commissioned the artist Jan Tiki from the Czech Republic to work with our collection. And one of the things he was most interested in was looking at the collection as a whole, almost as if it was as the database, as many people experience our exhibition by looking at our database. We have our entire collection online. And so he started to compare things like, what's the largest picture in the collection? What's the smallest picture in the collection? What's the brightest, the brightest, whitest picture in the collection? What's the darkest, almost black picture in the collection? And so on, all these pairs. I'm only going to show you one pair, which was one of my favorite pairs in the exhibition. And that is this pair, which is the largest picture and the smallest picture. And in this slide, you can't see the very small picture, but I loved this comparison. And I wanted to just show you kind of the object size of what these two look like to, encounter together of the largest. This is not the tallest piece in the exhibition, in the collection, but it is the longest piece. And this little piece is the smallest. And what you are looking at is a camera obscura by the Chinese artist Shigure, photographed in 2005, where he put a large strip of paper into a container and documented Shanghai changing. You have Pudong on one side, and you have the Bund on the other side, and it's sort of Shanghai kind of grew very quickly beginning in the late 90s. And so this picture sort of covers this sort of Shanghai, the growth of Shanghai. And what I love about what it's paired with is the very smallest picture in our collection is a very well-known American photographer, Walker Evans. And it's a photograph in the street. It's like a sewer, like a city grate in the street. And it's a very much of a detail of a city. It's the metal part of a street. And so what I loved about this pair is that it was brought together because of the largest picture and the smallest picture. And yet it both has to do with a giant city and then a detail of a city. And one happens to be in New York and one is Shanghai. And so I just really loved this pair. And it gives you a little bit of a sense of the smallest sense of what our 16,000 works in our collection are.
So lovely, so lovely.
Yeah. This is another works from our permanent collection. In here we have works by Christina Seeley, Penelope Umbreco, and Kaito. It's the scroll on the side there. And this was an exhibition just exploring how you move from one picture to another and how photographs can be in conversation with each other that have very different concepts. But I wanted to just zoom in on Christina Seeley's work, which is this photograph. She spent some time photographing the brightest cities across the world that you can see basically from the moon of what cities are emitting the most light. And then she titles each work kind of the longitude and latitude of these places around the world. When she did this project in 2005 and 2009, the cities that were the brightest were in Japan, Europe, and America at that time. Things have changed now. China has taken over, but in 2005, Japan and the US and some European cities were the brightest cities. This picture is of Kyoto. So she basically is taking a portrait of the city where she has like nature in the foreground, as well as trying to capture an entire city. This is another one of her photographs from Japan, again framed by nature. With Nagoya in the background glowing. This is another exhibition. I wanted to show you a couple exhibitions that we are a photography museum, although sometimes we do quite a bit of work that kind of will represent photography or represent image. This was an exhibition we have in our collection. It's called the Far East, Far West collection. And this was an exhibition that we did with 13 different artists. And on the floor of the gallery is actually 1 million black business cards. It's an installation about sometimes like the meaninglessness of passing business cards. It's like we're dependent. Well, today things have become electronic, but it's this topic of, hey, here's my contact, and then sometimes people get so many business cards, it's hard to know, like, who is that person? Anyway, so this was a very fun installation. This has the work of Yang Zhang on the side, and Himan Chong is the artist with the business cards. But I just wanted to show how we were installing. So we literally had 1 million business cards and we threw them up in the air. We had to cover the floor. And so at one point we had the entire crew and staff undoing the boxes and filling the floor with these business cards.
So lovely. 最高ですね。
This is an exhibition. Many of our exhibitions that we do, some of them that I've been showing you have been about the permanent collection. Many of the exhibitions that we do are also thematic exhibitions that aren't all works from our permanent collection. We borrow works, and then we also then will acquire work. This was an exhibition about artificial intelligence and photography and issues of face recognition and the biases that are inherent to artificial intelligence. And for this exhibition, we included the work. This is another installation view, but we included the work of Maja Tami, who has worked with a Japanese scientist who builds robots. Mm-hmm. And these 4 pictures, one of them, the title of the work is "One of Them is Human." Mm-hmm. So presented, 3 of them are robots, and one of them is human. Can you tell which one is human?
おそらく多分この一番右側の方が人間なんじゃないかなと思うんですけど、どうだろう。でもちょっと難しいですね。真ん中の人も怪しいなと思って。
So interesting that you say that. So you are right that the far right one is the human, and the far right one is the scientist who makes the robots, and the center one is his self-portrait of himself, the robot of him based on himself. Interestingly.
Interesting. 興味深いですね。右側が正解で、それが科学者の方だったんですけど、その真ん中、僕が真ん中かもしれないって言った方が、実はその彼の、ポートレート、要はそのサイエンティストの方のポートレートをベースに作ったアンドロイドっていうことですごく面白いですね。なるほど。
This is an exhibition we did with Ai Weiwei, where we really focused on Ai Weiwei's use of using the image as activism. And he has been taking pictures. Many people know Ai Weiwei as the sculptor and and the activist who he is, but he also has very much used photography throughout his whole career, starting with a black and white, camera, an analog camera in the late 80s and 90s to today. Many of you might know that he's very prolific on social media. So this was an exhibition that we did with him where we showed, thousands and thousands of his pictures that kind of look like all of his pictures that he takes. He's obsessive about taking pictures, and this was a project he did focused on the kind of the global refugee crisis in 2015 and 16. It has continued, but this is when he did this work of art. And then from there he's made a movie called The Human Flow that is based off of this work here. So much of the work that we do at the museum is about art and activism. And this is an example of an exhibition that was dealing with an environmental kind of a catastrophe local to Chicago, where we were focused on what's called the petroleum coke, which is a byproduct of the oil refinery on the south side of Chicago here. So we commissioned artists to do work about the oil and the industry. And whether it's a lot of video is based, we do a lot of video here at the Museum of Contemporary Photography, as well as you can see some sculpture on the right is sculpture. Not very photographic, but we blend it all together here to tell a wider story. And then I wanted to this is one of the levels of the museum where we had portraits of the environmental activists who were working. We worked closely with the activists to put this show together. And then a lot of this work then we goes out. So this is an example of the portraits that were then put up in a library, and we have our work kind of spread throughout Chicago in developing kind of that role of activism. Which leads me to some of the work that I do. I know that it was listed in my bio that I have, organized exhibitions outside of Chicago, and most recently I was one of the curators for the Lianzhou Photography Festival. And I did an exhibition titled Living Mountains. It was part of a group exhibition with six artists. And this is a way to work with artists kind of around the world. This was a very large exhibition where I was just one of the curators. It's pavilions all over Lianzhou, which is an amazing, if you ever have the chance. There were many Japanese artists included in the Lianzhou Photo Festival. Every year there are, and it's an exciting festival, but it also just shows how I, curate exhibitions outside of the museum, and that just gives you a little bit of a sense. This was the very last room in Lianzhou. And that gives you a sense of what I do at the museum.
ありがとうございます。いや、もう本当にすごい面白かったですね。それこそいろんなことをお聞きしたいなと思ったんですけど、特にアート&アクティビズムみたいなところで、ナターシャさんがキュレーションをされていたり、あるいはそのリアンジョ、リアンジョフォトフェスティバルっていうのは今その中国の中では最も大きいフォトフェスティバルの一つだし、そして歴史もあるフェスティバルなわけですけども、そういった海外の中でもキュレーションをされてきていると。そんなナターシャさんにぜひね、お聞きしたいなと思うのが、そのナターシャさんにとってのそのキュレーション、キュレーターというお仕事はどういう仕事なのかっていうのをちょっとお伺いしてみたいなと思います。
Yeah, for me, curation is about, well, it's really about coming up with a cohesive theme that will put a bunch of, a great variety of works into a cohesive. They sort of, the works, inform each other. And And so it's my favorite part of what I do is by thinking about how works work together and how they can be complement each other, but very different at the same time. So for example, with this Lianzhou exhibition, I focused on mountains. For a couple of reasons. There's a great history in photography, of nature, of course, in almost any country. But in the U.S., you have someone who's the most famous is like Ansel Adams, or even going back further to Carlton Watkins. And when I went to Lianzhou in 2017 for the opening of the Lianzhou Museum and the festival, and so I knew the city. I don't know it that well. I mean, I visited, but I knew the geography. And so part of what I did when I was asked to or invited to organize an exhibition is Lianzhou is in the mountains, and it's very mountainous in the city, like right in the city. And so I thought about embracing the idea of mountains. And so I wanted to, when you're given a space, and this is what you're like, curate a show for us, blank walls. Like, where do you could go in any direction, right? And so you have to think about, well, why this show in this place? And so in the end, and I personally am from, I grew up in the Rocky Mountains, like in New Mexico and Colorado. And so for me, that's also, I think, when you're a curator, you can't help but bring your own experiences into how you create or how you bring together artists. And so for me, knowing that the city was in these mountains, knowing that tourists come to Lianzhou for the nature, and it's really, really beautiful, and my love of mountains. I've never done a mountain show in my life, but this was calling me. And I worked with these artists that did none of the pictures were very straightforward mountains. I'm someone who looks at art, looks at artists where it has lots of layers, and there's complicated and there's either history in it, or you're learning something, or there's a complexity to why I'm drawn to a picture. And so my mountain show was complex. There were some straight mountains, but you can't really see them because I didn't give you enough pictures. But like they're in the background. Those are actually salt. Those are salt piles from the highways. So the highways use salt to in the winter time for the ice, and the salt creates these, like, they look like amazing mountains, but they actually are about highway control. But anyway, so an example of this conflicting, and I could go on and on about the different artists, but then also this idea of nature in mountains. And these were works where there was actually, this was a sound installation. So there were sounds of birds that have gone extinct in Lianzhou. And so these are the sound patterns of the birds. And then there's this nature, and then the wind would blow the photographs of the sound. But so it was about nature. So this gives you a little sense of, like, when I say I'm doing a mountain show, it's definitely not going to be pictures of straight mountains.
ありがとうございます。いや、すごく面白かったです。特になんだろうな、まずナターシャさんがこのマウンテンの展示をしたとき、この山の展示をしたときに、もうこのリアン城が、山の中にある町で、そして まさに自分が calling me って言われてましたけど、その自分がもうこれをやれって呼ばれたっていう思いからやったっていう話が、とてもすごく良かったなと思うのと、今のそのナターシャさんお話しされていたところもありましたけれども、その今いらっしゃるコロンビアカレッジシカゴっていうのが、いわゆる非常にそのアカデミックな、アートインスティテューションということもあって、そのエデュケーションであったりとか、あるいはアクティビズムだったりとか、あるいは社会の問題みたいなものを、に立ち向かっている、作家さんたち、をですね、取り上げて、そしてそれを見せていく場にしているっていうところも、一つその、ナターシャさんの写真の考えていく上で非常に重要視しているポイントなんだっていうのもよく分かりました。それから今すごく印象的だったのが、ナターシャさんにとってはそのストレートな写真を見せたいっていうことではないということで、その辺もやっぱりその先ほどの calling me っていう言葉にあったように、その自分が呼ばれているこう自分がやらなきゃいけないショーなんだっていうところで、何かナターシャさんが見ている写真、あるいはその写真とは何かっていうものがすごくその垣間見える、ようなお話だったんじゃないかなと思います。ありがとうございます。そのナターシャさんのキュレーションっていうものがどういうものかっていうものがですね、非常に分かってきたところ、それからナターシャさんがどういう写真を、その選ぶ目を持たれているのかっていうところが、少し分かってきたような気がするんですけど、一つちょっと質問をしてみたいなと思うことがありまして、例えばその展示をするとき、新たな作家を見つけるときに、これをやりたいというテーマが先に来るのか、あるいは、作家を見つけていて、ある時はこういう作家の人たちで何か展示をやりたいなと思うこともあるのか、ちょっとその2つのパターン聞いてみたいなと思うんですね。ちょっと先ほどの話では、そのリアンジョーっていう場所でやってほしいっていうことが来たので、その場所の中で何をやるのか、山に囲まれた街っていうところと、ご自身の、暮らしていた、ロッキーマウンテンというところでの、そういったその文化的あるいは育ってきた環境の背景を組み合わせて、その山というものをテーマで見つけたという話されてたんですけど、多分毎回そういうわけではなくて、ご自身のお勤めになられている美術館でもそういうふうに展示をするということがあると思いますので、そのあたりどっちが来るのかっていうのを聞いてみたいと思います。
So that is a great question, and it very much depends on. I would say that the art typically comes absolutely first, and what happens is, so for example, with that exhibition about artificial intelligence that I was describing, I had seen a project by an artist named Trevor Paglen, who did this video, and it was all about face recognition, and it was owned by a foundation here in Chicago, and so they had sent me that said, hey, we own this piece. If you ever want to show it, that would be great. And it's a piece I had seen before, and I didn't know that they had owned it, and it was in Chicago now. And because it's a very complicated, complex video where we kind of needed the support of the foundation to even help it. But in there, so why I say it goes both ways is that I have like a huge file of ideas, and it could be as broad as like data, artificial intelligence, and sort of immigration issues, refugee, but each topic is so big, but it usually takes then finding the piece, what I call almost like the grounding project for a thematic show, where it's like, here's where I'm going to start, and now I'm going to build it, and so it usually comes with a grounding. My hope is that you have no idea which one is the grounding one, right? Because you want them all to be equal, right. Represented. But just like building any story, you typically start with a character and you build on it. And so in many cases, I will meet an artist at a portfolio review and think, oh, I've been thinking about this sort of in a broad way, but this is now a must. and then I build the show from it. And so in almost every project I've ever done, you have what you would call that foundation artist or two. And then it's built depending on the space and okay, how many artists should I work with? Can I work with? How much, is it a big group show where you can have 30 artists and a few pieces, or is it like in this case, this was a large space, but only 6 artists. But the ideas are just always what's happening. You open up a newspaper and the ideas are right there, because this is what's happening in the world today. And contemporary artists are usually responding to the themes that are happening in the world today, whether they're an environmental or issues of race or whatever the topic is. Typically there are artists who are really working in those subjects. And then it becomes like earlier, I talked about the business cards. It becomes who do you meet and who introduces you and who, because I'm introduced to artists constantly. I mean, every day I'm introduced to an artist. And sometimes it's great to be like, oh, that's great work. I would love to show it sometime, but there's also a limit of, so it's about, meeting artists and then being really convinced by some of them to.
いや、なるほど、すごい。いや、面白いな。本当にグラウンディングアーティストっていうのがいて、そしてその人をきっかけにショーを作っていこうということもあるし、当然いつも新聞だったりとかを見られて、気になるトピック、例えばデータ、それから、あるいは AI みたいなものを持ちながら、そして今のまさにおっしゃっていたような現代の作家というのは、そういった問題に対して非常に敏感に作品を作られているから、そういったものに合うものが両方重なってできてくるっていう話は非常に面白かったですし、いろんな人に作品を紹介されて見ていくっていうようなところがある、というような話もあってですね、ぜひちょっと次のトピックに入っていきたいなと思うんですね。非常に今この流れがいいなと思っているのは、まず1個目は、じゃあナターシャさんの興味関心とともに関連していると思うんですけど、写真というものが今一体どこに向かっているのかっていうのがまず一つ興味がある。そういうふうにどう思われているかっていうところが聞きたいということと、同時にその出会いっていうところですよね。作家とどう出会っていくのか、というところでどういった方法があるのかということ、またその出会った写真家さんたちの情報っていうものをナターシャさんがどうファイリングされているのか、ということだったり、どういうふうにキープしているのか、あるいはその作家にとって一番いい方法でそのミュージアムのキュレーターに作品を見せていく方法っていうのはどういう方法なのか、このあたりは多分実務的な部分を含めて非常に興味ある方多いと思うので、ちょっとぜひ聞いていきたいなと思います。
Yeah, so I always have a very hard time answering that question about what the photography of the future is, because what I think is that I think photographers and artists are absolutely leaders in what that future is, right? They are technology changes, our relationship technology changes. So it would have been very challenging to predict that there would be millions of photographs uploaded to the World Wide Web every day. There's an absolute bombardment of photography.
Right.
So that would have been hard to predict. When I first started being a curator, it was very much about, I met every artist I worked with. I went to a studio visit with that artist. And then we would talk about maybe showing that work. And then we would show the work. It was a very long process, but you never ever showed an artwork that you hadn't seen in person. That was in the 90s. Today, you meet artists from all over the world, and even more so today, even more virtual. And somebody will send you the JPEGs, you'll produce an exhibition print for example, all of the work that you see in Lianzhou, Lianzhou produced all of it, and then destroyed all of it. There's a whole thing of, unfortunately, of destroying exhibition prints because of the art market. So that's a whole nother topic. But this ease of global conversation with photography is very present and not going anywhere. So the future is a constant of voices, a diversity of voices being brought together in different spaces, because you don't have to physically go to Tokyo and meet an artist to show the work today. It used to be much harder, and now you can meet somebody, you can submit your work, to a juried exhibition. You can submit your work to the Sony Awards. You can try to go to, there's portfolio reviews where you can get your work in front of people. This year it's all been virtual, which has been actually maybe wonderful and cost effective for so many people. I have met hundreds of artists virtually through these, kind of virtual portfolio reviews. So that's part of the answer. I'll answer the next part. I will answer is about how do you get your work in front of people, and how do you get them to remember you, because there's so much work that you're looking at. It's fair to say that sometimes you won't be remembered, and you have to just understand that it takes time. It takes being an artist who is deeply passionate about their subject, because sometimes I might meet an artist who is thinking about his subject, but I can tell that they're not as invested in it as they need to be. It might be a little just too surface, or doesn't go deep enough, or their research hasn't gone deep enough. And there's so many pictures out there that are surface, I mean, everybody's taken a picture of everything. I mean, I feel like I've seen the world because everybody takes a picture of things and they post it on Instagram. That doesn't mean it has the depth to have a show at a museum, because so I am personally less interested in the amazing single image. That's for, there's a great avenue for the single great photograph, whether it's to make a huge impact on a billboard, about a social impact. I mean, there's a great use of the single image. It's not what I do. I work with artists who have gone in depth on their subject. So when you're an artist and you want to approach a curator, the best ways to do it are, if you can, start to submit work to juried exhibitions. The next way is to try to participate in portfolio reviews. And when you get to a portfolio review, you're going to meet a lot of different people with a lot of different interests, and be ready for some people to not engage with your work, and other people will be very engaged with your work. So don't take it personally when someone maybe doesn't engage with your work. But when you do feel an engagement and it's the right fit, it's important that you then stay in touch with those people. It's important that you continue to not too much, but continue to write them. I would say, and it's going to sound long for a lot of photographers, on a yearly basis. Write the curator and say, hey, we met, or you saw my work at the portfolio review, and I want to give you an update of what I'm doing. And those updates are very helpful because sometimes you can't work with an artist right away. In a lot of cases, you might be able to work with them in 2 years. And so it's good to stay, what we say, on people's radar, because it's very easy to be forgotten because there's so many, there's so many emails, there's so many artists that you meet. But if you had a good connection, you just stay in touch respectfully.
ありがとうございます。いや、非常に興味深いですね。まずいくつか言われてた中で、やっぱりシングルのイメージではなくて、やっぱり表面だけをかじったような写真ではなくて、やっぱり深さがあるもの、それは多分ポートフォリオという形で何枚もの作品で見せてもらわなきゃいけないっていうことが1個あると。それこそ作家がどれだけそのテーマに対して、時間だったりとか、あるいはリサーチだったりということに投資をしたかっていうことが分かるような作品っていうのが非常に重要だっていう話があったのと、あと特に若手の作家の場合であれば、まずやる方法の一つとしては、審査員がしっかりとしたコンテスト、アワードみたいなものに出していただく、あるいはポートフォリオレビューに出ていくっていう話で、アドバイスをいただいたわけですけれども、今回ナターシャさんが、審査をされたソニーワールドフォトグラフィーアワードっていうのも、そういった意味では、世界で最も大きいフォトコンテストということで知られているわけですが、ナターシャさんが今回コンテストで出会った人の中でですね、やっぱりコンテストがなければ知ることができなかった作家さん、あるいは気になった作家がいれば、ちょっとぜひ教えていただきたいなと思うんですけれども、いかがでしょうか。
So it was a great privilege to be one of the judges of the Sony World Photography Awards for 2021, and I saw work from artists from, well, actually you don't know where they're from, the artist, because it's all anonymous, but I saw I should say work from all over the world, and all different types of work. I mean, there are many different categories that people apply for the awards, whether it's documentary or portraiture or environmental, wildlife photography, all these different pieces. And there was so much. And what's also great is working with a group of jurors, because when we met, normally you do it in person. This time we just spent, we reviewed everything individually, and then then you talk about the ones that are then rated the highest among everybody. But you're so it's so great to talk about the different arts, because you see how the jurors also came from kind of all over the world, and what they're attracted to, and then how they defend works completely changes what you maybe didn't see the same level, and then they say like, this is why it's drawing me, and I would say this is what's drawing me, and it's this whole like conversation, and it was really, really wonderful. It was wonderful to get to know the other judges as well. So I've just pulled for you 4 of the artists that I learned about through, but this was so Laura Panak was the winner of the portfolio, which is a very very general category, and it was about submitting less about a body of specific work and more groups, although this looks like it's from a body of work. These 3 pictures definitely, but they're from very different projects that she was working on, but she has an aesthetic that is goes through her works. And so I just pulled these 3 pictures, but it was really wonderful to learn about these works, how she uses the fog and the landscape and the posturing of, I like when another work I'll show is where where there's a group portrait where everybody's sort of, it's almost like setting up a play, it's almost a theater. But I very much liked these three pictures from Laura. The creative winner was Mark Hamilton, and I really loved these pictures at first, but it was also some of we ended up talking about them so much and identifying. And one of the things that we talked a lot about as jurors, and which I talk about a lot now, is what is it like to make work during the pandemic? And we were judging during a pandemic, and so many people had to think creatively because they couldn't leave their homes. And so many photographers, it's all about leaving your home. It's all about traveling to a destination and capturing all of these things, whether it's the environment that we talked about earlier or whatever it is. And so what we saw with a lot of work, and one of the reasons we gave Mark Hamilton the Creative Award is we really did feel that he embraced the creativism of how do you make work not leaving your home, but push it into a whole nother place. And in this case, as if he's gone to the moon, but of course he never left his home. And he's using, negatives he's using NASA material that's anyone can use. You can download it from and play with it. And then he just created as if he was going to the moon and having his barbecue in his backyard on the moon. And then the one on the right, those are actually, if you look closely, those are actually the coronavirus spores that are kind of dumping in, and he's putting them into this kind of fire thing, and they're all around. Anyway, so for us and for me, when I saw this work, I thought, okay, this is really interesting pandemic work. And then there's many more, but I just showed these two. They all are on the moon. They're all, they're all just kind of crazy pictures.
I love this picture. この写真が本当にいいなと思うのは、まさに今、ナターシャさんおっしゃったみたいに、ステイホームの期間中に家にいながらこの作品を作っていくっていうこともそうなんですけど、地球で起こっていることと、月っていうことのこの対比の中で、地球はもう本当に世の中いろいろ変わってコロナでとかってなってたりとか、いろんな問題がある中で、月だけはその地球の変化を一切無視するかのように何も変わっていない。おそらくアポロ計画の時から変わってないっていうこの風景がそのまま続いてるっていうのは非常に面白くて、このコントラスト、まさに今だからこそ作れるものだし、その対比みたいなところが非常にユニークな写真だなと思って、僕もすごく好きな作品の一つです。
The documentary winner is, I also really loved these pictures. It's called The Killing Daisy. And this was a story, a documentary story about the flower, this daisy flower in Kenya, that it's these organic, it's basically they use the flower as a pesticide, as an organic pesticide for farming. And so this became this environmental, it was the story of this place, of the farmers. It's not been so easy, but because pesticides today are so toxic for our environment, this is like an organic way of keeping the bugs away from eating your crops. And these are only 3 pictures. It was a very beautifully done documentary about the farm and the people and the owners of it and the flowers and who's working in the factory, of how you take these daisy flowers and put the, grind them into the into the pesticide, that you use. And so it was a very innovative, approach. And I really liked the variety of photographs that told the larger story.
なるほど、なるほど。いや、本当にここには3枚しかないですけど、確かにこのオーガニックな、 なんていうんですかね、殺虫剤というか、除虫菊って言われてる菊らしいんですけれども、の物語っていうのを撮ってくる。そのストレートな写真なんだけれども、その作品のバラエティだったりとか、その深さみたいなもので伝えてくるものっていうのは非常に強いものがありますよね。それからすごくポジティブな話だっていうのも、やっぱりそのエンバイロメンタルイシューというか、その環境問題における写真っていうとですね、やっぱり非常に深刻なテーマが多い中で、非常にその明るい未来を想像させるような作品っていうのも非常にユニークだったんじゃないかなという気がしています。
Yeah, that's what I loved about this portrait, the vertical portrait with the flowers and her smile and her hopefulness, but it's like she's also living the nature. And anyways, that exact reason we all fell in love with this work was because of the story of hope as well, and Vito Fusco's approach to it.
Yeah, yeah.
And the last one that I will show was the portraiture winner. And then Craig Easton was then the overall winner as well. He uses like a 8x10 camera, with the 8x10, maybe 4x5, maybe a 4x5 traditional camera in a town in the north part of England that has had, it's an industrial town that has struggled also with, industry changing, poverty, race issues, immigration, and there's these layers, and he's approaching the subjects, but in a very traditional way. So these you wouldn't have any idea that they were made in 2021 or 2020. I think they were photographs are from 2020, but it's a long-term project of his that's continuing. But they're very timeless, and so there is also the idea of photography being timeless, where you don't know exactly what time period is, but you can still be contemporary photography because these were photographed in 2020.
Wow, that's quite amazing.
So anyway, so these were 4 artists that I so-called discovered, and now will know their work. And I don't have plans to show them at the Museum of Contemporary Photography right away, but it was a way to be exposed to artists that I never had a chance to see before.
最後にですね、これをご覧になられている写真家の方にぜひアドバイスをいただけたら嬉しいなと思うんですけれども、ナターシャさん、いかがでしょうか。
So I think my advice to photographers is to my first advice is to be deeply passionate about the subject that you are photographing. For me, that's the most important, because that comes through the clearest is when I can tell that the artist is deeply committed and passionate about the work that they are showing us, showing different reviewers, different curators. Because sometimes I find that I see really wonderful pictures, but I don't necessarily know if the artist themselves realizes the depth of their pictures. And I think you really have to understand what you're doing. It takes some more research, and it just takes a dedication. I also think it's really I spoke earlier about the difference between working on what would be considered a body of work versus the single image. I think for many artists, there's for the kind of museum and gallery industry, it's much better to really go in depth on a subject and work it through until you have so many pictures that then you can edit it down to a really cohesive, strong body of work. There should not be one picture that's not working in there. And sometimes as artists, it's very difficult to edit your own work because you're the one taking the picture. You were breathing the air at the time, and you see so much more in the picture than someone else sees. So whenever you're going to edit, bring someone in there with you who doesn't see the picture, who wasn't with you when you were breathing that air, so that they can tell you what they're seeing.
ありがとうございます。いや、本当に素晴らしいアドバイスで、まさにその写真をですね、本当に自分が情熱的であるということはもちろん最低の条件だと思うんですけど、さらにその作品をしっかり深さっていうのがやっぱり分からないことがあるっておっしゃってましたけれども、ちゃんとリサーチをすることだったり、作品に対してしっかり編集をする、特にそのポートフォリオレビューみたいに、直接お話しする場があればまた別なんでしょうけれども、そうではなくて、作品だけで見せなきゃいけないという時には、その写真一点一点がなぜそう撮られているのか、あるいはなぜその中に、こういうものが入っているのかっていうことですね。そういったものはしっかり構築できていて語れなきゃいけない。そういうようなところがですね、特に編集のところでもしやったことがないのであれば、誰かを入れてやるっていうこともそうですけれども、非常に本当に見る側の立場から、非常にプラクティカルというか、実践的なアドバイスをいただけたかと思います。ナタシャさん、どうもありがとうございます。今日、改めてですね、このトークを振り返ってですけれども、やはりその、コロンビア大学シカゴの、現代写真美術館というところでですね、エグゼクティブキュレーターを、されていらっしゃるナターシャ・イーガンさんに、写真についてお伺いしたわけですけれども、やはりその彼女のお話を聞いていて非常にその印象的だったのは、写真というメディアがやはりそのテクノロジーとともに常に進化していて、そしてその、アーティストというのはですね、その今起こっている課題、社会における課題であったりとか、さまざまな問題、必ずしも問題じゃないかもしれませんけれども、今起こっている出来事に対して、やはりその誰よりも早くリアクションし、しかもそれが単なるその表面的に取るものではなくて、やはりそのものに対して時間をかけて何か伝えたいもの、あるいは伝えたい意図みたいなものがあるんだということが、やはりそのナターシャさんが求めている作品に対しては非常にあるんだなというのは明確に分かったような気がします。で、今回その、ソニーワールドフォトグラフィーアワードもそうですけれども、ポートフォリオレビューであったりとか、さまざまなチャンスがある中で、どういうふうに作品を出していくべきなのか、あるいはそのたまたまつながった方々とどういうふうにコミュニケーションしていけばいいかなどですね、非常に細かいところまで素敵なアドバイスをいただけたんじゃないかなと思っておりまして、今日最後まで聞いていただいた方にも非常に意義のある会になったんじゃないかと思います。改めてナターシャさんに御礼申し上げたいと思います。ナターシャさん、どうもありがとうございました。
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed speaking with you. Actually, thank you.
ありがとうございます。